Okay, welcome everyone to our writing circle on writing your discussion. My name's Kerry and it's lovely to have you all along. We're right on midday, so we are going to get started. And just to begin, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders' laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, so I do already have today's slides up on Blackboard. I'm going to give you the link in the chat right now, so you can go in and have a look there. Recording probably up tomorrow, but you will receive an email from me letting you know that it's up and giving you the link, which will be this link here that you've got now. So we're looking at the purpose and the structure of your discussion chapter. We're looking at strategies to synthesize and critically discuss your research results using evidence. And as always, while we are generally talking about thesis chapters, of course, if you're writing a research article, you're going to have a discussion section. So, you know, the strategies we look at today are certainly applicable to a research article as well. You're just compressing it into a much shorter space, of course. It is common to find the results and discussion chapters challenging, and there is a lot of back and forth, of course, between the two. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into that finished product. It does take a lot of planning. You might have to get to sort of plan B or plan C for it to be working the way that you and your supervisory team want it to be working. But even if you're not at your data collection stage, no matter where you're at, it's always a good idea to start your planning and start thinking how you're going to present and then discuss your data. So this is a writing circle. So we have exemplars, a few practical activities as well. And we also have workshops, as you know. So just to begin you thinking, if you can jot down on a piece of paper or however you want, write down one or two of the research gaps that your research field currently has. And if you can write down one or two of your research aims as well, just jot down a couple of notes because we will come back to these and look at them a little bit later. Now, your aim would not generally be to fill a research gap. It couldn't be your main aim. Your main aim would be to find insight into something. But it could be one of the aims, I suppose, to help fill a research gap, but certainly it won't be your only one, your only aim. They should be separate. We can talk about that a bit later. Thank you for all your student ID numbers in the chat. You can keep them coming in if you haven't done that yet. Okay, let's keep going. So we've got a bit of a welcome. We're looking at purpose and structure as we saw. We're going to have a look at critical discussion and synthesis and examine our exemplar as well. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So today's activities, hopefully you saw the UniHub email that would have come out yesterday morning asking you to have your draft discussion handy. It is for your own use. You won't need to share it. Good idea to be, as you're going, sort of writing a few notes in there. And we will be examining exemplars also. Now, with the exemplars, you know, and the examples that I use throughout the sessions, they're not always going to be completely exactly the same, of course, as your research field. So don't be put off by that, please. You can still learn from them. I try to choose topics that, even though they will be unfamiliar in some ways, as far as your you know, exact knowledge. You will have some understanding. I choose topics that we can all sort of have an idea about as such. So, and I'm not saying your examples have to be exactly like the ones that we use as exemplars. They're just a guide to help you to make evaluative judgments and look at the writing quality. I will never choose an exemplar that's bad. They will always be good and well written. Nothing's ever perfect though, so sometimes we will find things that could have been maybe a little bit better, but certainly overall the exemplars I choose are examples of quality writing. So just my usual little spiel here, make sure you're using the resources on HiQ. Your candidature is where you find out about all your milestones and anything about presenting your thesis. Training and workshops, of course, are where you find out all the great sessions available, and training. Engage with industry if you're looking for an internship, which is certainly a really good way to widen your view of what's out there for you career-wise. And of course, planning your career. We have a lot of really great sessions with our careers educator to help you to start that planning and applying for jobs. All right, some key terms and basics. So in case you didn't come to the writing circle on writing your results, here's a little bit of repetition here of this hierarchy. So your research design is all the steps that you took to collect and analyze the evidence to achieve your research aims. Methodology would generally be qualitative or quantitative or both. So it's underpinned by your philosophy of how new knowledge is gained. If you're a qualitative researcher, you're thinking that we need to find perceptions and words and go deeply into the participants, what their thoughts are. Quantitative, we're more into numbers, so that's surveys, experiments, those sorts of things. Your methods then are the strategies that you're obtaining the evidence, so your instruments, your tools, your sampling, data analysis. And just a quick reminder that your terminology when you're using for survey responses should be respondent. And if you're collecting qualitative data, then it would be participant. Okay, so, and of course, this is very broad. I know that there's many methods and methodologies and research designs, but this is just to give a very broad overview because, of course, your discussion is linked to your methodology because that's how you've collected and analyzed the data. So no matter where you are in your candidature, always keep in mind your key research aims. Can you even write, and also the research problem, thinking about that in a couple of sentences, your aims and your questions. So they really need to be clear in your mind all of the time because that data analysis is the starting point to find your answers. And then the discussion then moves us to the interpretation of that data analysis. So the process isn't linear, just like with everything, you're constantly going backwards and forwards. And I like this quote about living with and wrestling with the data. And then eventually in that discussion, of course, you're integrating the evidence that you found with the literature. We talk about this a fair bit as well, about your thesis telling a story. It's a narrative with a beginning, the introduction, and with an end, the conclusion. And I would argue that your discussion is the high point. It's where you've been heading, okay? You're informing, you're persuading that there's the research problem and the research gaps. You're using all the literature as evidence to justify and explain and persuade. Then you're presenting your data, then you're discussing it. So I would say this is the bit the readers are really keen to get to. And everything that comes before is leading us to that discussion. So remember the connection. So discussion and results, of course, inextricably linked, right? Results is where you're stating what you found, and the discussion is what does it mean? And not only just what does it mean, what does it mean in the context of the research field? How have you added to the scholarly conversation? Then, of course, your discussion and your lit review. Think of those two as mirrors, okay? Your lit review starts that part of the story of where the research field is at right now. And then your discussion then, you know, begins to add to that lit review discussion that you've already provided with the bonus content of your empirical evidence. So if you think of your discussion and your lit review as mirrors, that may give you some ideas on how to structure your discussion. Go back and have a look at your lit review. How have you structured that? Maybe the discussion might work to be structured the same way. And if we think about our favorite readers, who of course are our examiners, what do they want from you in this discussion chapter? They want the empirical evidence that you have, engage with it, interpret it, put it into the scope of the lit review as well, but don't go further, right? They don't want you to come up with interpretations and conclusions and recommendations that are not directly linked to the evidence that you came up with your data collection and analysis. Then, of course, they also want to see that literature in there as well. Where are you as part of the literature? You are part of this research community. Where do your findings fit exactly within that research community? And we talk about this as well. And of course, examiners are annoyed and distracted by presentation errors, as would anybody be reading a document. Conversely, if the presentation is good, it makes reading much more enjoyable. So keep that in your minds throughout the whole of your document. Okay, let's have a look at purpose and structure. So we're going to look at these sort of subheadings. Purpose, what needs to be in there? Can you combine results and discussion? What's the difference between the discussion and conclusion? I do get asked that a lot. We'll think a bit about structure, getting started and staying on track. All right. So as I said before, and look, if you want to pop into the chat what you think, I just feel like that the discussion is where you've been headed. I feel like that's the destination. And then your conclusion is just wrapping it all up, isn't it? So, you know, when you think about the examiner or any reader of your thesis and you're telling that story, I think that the discussion bit is the key. It's the bit where they find out all of this great insight that your study has yielded. If you want to pop in the chat, if you agree, maybe you disagree, which is fine. But if we're thinking about your results, you've presented the data and then we need to progress their understanding of, well, okay, what does all that data mean? Okay. And also don't forget too, the discussion is where you are really demonstrating your research skills. Okay. You're showing all the way through, you've identified a problem, you've got all the evidence, you've said what the lay of the land is in your literature of your field, how you've got your research design. This is how I'm going to address this research problem and answer my research questions. Then you're showing, presenting the data, and then of course, bringing that final, almost final part of your research skills to then say, here's what my data means, and leading towards your contribution as well. So the purpose, we've pretty much said what the purpose, but let's look at it even more in more detail. So your research findings or your research results, whichever you're calling them, they're presenting and describing the empirical findings. No bias, no interpretation, just saying, this is what the data analysis found. But remember, the results don't prove anything yet. Your discussion is what the research is meant, what the research means, and why it's valuable. So if we look at your discussion, then it's your critical analysis of that data within the field of study, okay? And you're interpreting what they mean in terms of your research aims, your questions or your hypotheses, how they relate to the literature and the field in general, and you're providing those interpretations based on your evidence and the evidence from the literature. So then what do we need to have in the discussion then? So it's evidence-based, of course. So you've got your evidence from the literature, from previous studies. You really need in the discussion to explicitly answer your research questions. Now, if your supervisor or you or all your supervisory team say, no, I want you to answer your research questions in the conclusion, okay. I'm not saying you can't do that, but generally you explicitly answer them in the discussion. You're also beginning to state what the contribution and insights are to fill the research gaps. You're setting everything up for your conclusions and implications. Maybe you're going to recommend future research as well. So you're planting those seeds. And also don't forget about your stakeholders. Yes, of course, you have participants, or if you're doing quantitative research in the lab, you're doing experiments, you're still going to have stakeholders, of course, you just don't have participants as such. But start in that discussion as well to be thinking about how your stakeholders are going to benefit, okay? So it seems like a lot. Do you think that the discussion, if you're already started to write it, does it feel like, oh, it's getting pretty big, it's almost getting a bit out of control, I need to rein it back in, I'm stuck on how to structure potentially? Again, completely normal, and it will take time. That's why we seek feedback and why we write drafts, isn't it? So I like this quote. The discussion chapter is the problem child of the thesis. Do you feel like it's your problem child? It's most likely the chapter to provoke fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because we're getting to the nitty-gritty, aren't we? We're having to say, this is my contribution. This is my answers to the research question. This is where my research fits into a whole field of study. So not everybody has a chapter called discussion. We'll look at that in a minute. Sometimes it's combined maybe with results or combined in some way with the conclusion, but we all have the discussion-y bits. We have to, because you have to interpret your findings. So the discussion section is scary because you have to make new knowledge claims of your own, not just agree or disagree with other people. When did we just agree or disagree? In the lit review, but we still had critical analysis, didn't we, that you had to do? So you are already on track of how to critically analyze. So use those things those effective writing practices from your lit review will come over to the discussion as well. So without knowledge claims, you don't have a thesis at all, just a report of work that was done. That's not meant to scare you either. But as I said, with this discussion, you're talking about what your contribution is, what insights have you made, and how do they add to that scholarly conversation. So a knowledge claim is just an assertion that you're making supported with evidence. It's your arguments, it's your contribution. So even though it does seem like a lot, you've got this. As I just said, you've already, been critically analysing the literature in your lit review. So now you're critically analysing your own research and evidence plus the literature on top of that. So be confident. Think about your previous self. You had a research design that was robust and appropriate. You know how to think critically. You've got good, strong knowledge of your field and, of course, of your study. So trust yourself, be confident. And, no one else knows your study better than you do, not even your supervisors. So, trust that you have come up with these insights and then figure out how it adds and extends to what we already know. And also remember, it's a PhD, not a Nobel Prize. You're not meant to be solving world peace. And, a small contribution is going to be good. So we've talked about all the things that need to be in the discussion. Let's really simplify it. move backwards and forwards between your research, the other research that's already been done, what are the similarity and differences, and then ultimately, how have you been able to answer your research questions or your hypotheses? Now, as always, seeking feedback is the key, okay? So there could be a lot of things you need to ask feedback on for this chapter. So you're going to be having to ask, okay, how's my critical analysis? Is it there? Can you see it? Am I arguing? Am I persuading? You might have to ask about structure, how they feel, the people giving feedback. What do they think? Is it flowing in a clear way? Are you scaffolding and leading the reader through? You might also need to ask them if you've given enough information about what you found. Do you need to sort of remind the reader about what the findings were that were in the previous chapter? So a lot to think about. So try and ask specific questions when you're asking for feedback. Try to develop a network of readers, not just your supervisors if you can. And of course, this backwards and forwards asking and receiving feedback is going to help you get into the reader's shoes. You'll learn, if you start getting the same feedback regularly, then you'll be able to address that and make those improvements. If a reader says to you it's not quite clear, you need to believe them, reword, add more information. Maybe you need to add another sentence, maybe a table or a figure. But, you know, through it all, don't forget that the feedback is about what you've written in that piece of paper. It's not about you, all right? So try to breathe, try to not get too emotional, and understand that it's all going to make the document much, much better. All right, now, we said before that not everybody has a discussion chapter. So let's think about whether we combine results and discussion. We did look at this in the results writing circle, but it is worthwhile revisiting because the answer here is absolutely not. You cannot combine your results and discussion. They must be separated. They're two distinct parts of the thesis with specific purposes. You need to present and report your results or your findings with no interpretation first, then you interpret them. Okay, now, while you can't essentially combine them, you will probably see, or you might have decided to combine, to put results and discussion in one chapter. That's okay. They just need to be different sections though. They cannot be combined and be in together. They must be separated because you need to present the data, then discuss the data. Now, if you decide to do it like this, which is perfectly fine, you know, to have them in the same chapter, if that works for you, just make sure you tell the reader at the start exactly what to expect. So then what about the discussion and the conclusion? As I said, you might sometimes see the discussion and conclusion in one chapter. If you're writing research articles, we often see that as well, don't we? The discussion and the conclusion in one section of the article. So they are different. They do need to be separated into different sections, of course, but they may be able to be in one chapter if that's the best for your document. So the discussion, we're explaining and interpreting the research findings. Conclusion, you're completing the study. Okay, so the conclusion is the mirror of the introduction, where you're restating what you found, restating the research contributions and significance, and talking about future direction. So it's a little bit of repetition, isn't it? But really boiling down to the exact insights you have found and the contributions and significance. So you've given all of that in a discussion and planted those seeds, and then you then move on to that concluding of the whole research project. So if we're thinking about structure, and you can be looking at your document and the structure of it at the moment, I think initially the key thing here is to keep it simple. Okay, so, and then just focus on the content, make sure that you've covered all the things you need to cover, and then you can sort of start to seek feedback on whether it's the best way to present it or not. So is it the same as the lit review? Maybe same as results. Maybe you've got thematic results, maybe you have related to concepts, maybe parts of the experiments that you may have been running. So that could be a way, similar to the lit review structure or similar to the results structure. Maybe you have, as I said, theoretical or conceptual framework. Maybe you can do it via the research questions. If you have more than one research question, maybe that would work to discuss specifically in terms of each research question. So choose one, have a go, seek feedback, and then see if you need to. Yeah, so thanks. In the chat, the structure of the discussion section is tricky. It really is. So I think just try to keep it simple. See if similar to the lit review or results would work. Try one of these, seek feedback, and then go from there. I would, if you've come to a lot of my classes, you would know I tell the story from myself, from my, I got up to about literally plan E. We tried a whole stack of different ways and none of them were working. And in the end, I actually did it around the research questions. I had a chapter for research question 1, research question 2, research question 3, where I presented the results and then discussed in the next section. And the reason why that worked is because of my theoretical framework. Question 1 answered one part of the theoretical framework. Question 2 was for the other part, and question 3 related to the third part. So that's why I was able to do that. It actually in the end made complete sense, but it just took me a long time to figure that out. So it could be the same for you. And as I said, that's why we write drafts and seek feedback. So here's some more sort of possible options. We looked at this in the results writing circle as well. So as we said, yeah, maybe responding to the research questions. Now, if you're doing thesis by publication, you may have each article has its own results and discussion. So how is that going to work? So maybe you have a chapter for each of those research articles, if that's the way it works for you. Do you need to bring the results and discussion from each article together at some point? Maybe not until the conclusion. That could be a way around that. Of course, a lot of us now have multiple phases or mixed methods. Perhaps potentially that's a way to present the discussion. Maybe you'll do what I did and you do have the results and discussion in the same chapter, but they're still separated. That could be something around your phases. That could be it as well. So we're going to look at some examples and then you're going to look at your document. Now our 2 exemplars today, actually, I'm just going to pop into the chat right now. Today's activity sheet. All right, so we're just going to have a look at the 2 exemplars. We're going to have a look at their table of contents and see what we can see. Okay, so thesis title here is Risk Factors Associated with Infection in Patients with Chronic Leg Ulcers. Now, this is by publication. So there's actually 3 methodology results chapters. So because there's 3 articles, so you can see there chapter 9.3, that's one of the articles, right? And so this researcher has methodology and results for the 3 research articles that they published. Then look at that, chapter 10, discussion and conclusion, they're put together. So that would be where all of the research articles that they had published are brought together to, you can see 10.1, contribution to knowledge, strengths and limitations, implications, recommendations, and then a final conclusion. All right, let's have a look at exemplar 2. So chapter 9, discussion. I think from memory, there was a couple of results chapters. I can't quite remember, but this one is the discussion chapter, obviously. So what do you notice there? 9.1, introduction. So introduction to the discussion. I don't think that's necessary to have a subheading that says introduction anywhere other than your chapter that's the introduction. So within your thesis chapters, try to avoid that subheading. But I mean, look, we can see here that they're introducing the discussion chapter. So, you know, we can get that. And then you've got your themes there, and then the themes are then have sub-themes. And you've got a chapter summary at the end. Yeah, so chapter overview, someone's saying instead of writing introduction. Look, to be honest, I think that self-regulated learning could be the 9.1, okay? So you have your chapter heading, even if it's 4 or 5 paragraphs to tell us what's going on in this chapter. You know, I doubt you would have that many, but you might. You could certainly have more than one. But I just don't think you need any subheading. You have the chapter, introduce us, tell us what's going on. Then your first section could be your first theme or however it is that you're structuring it. Yeah, chapter overview is okay. Yeah, whatever you like and your supervisors like, okay. I just wouldn't put introduction as a subheading in a chapter that wasn't, because you already have a chapter called introduction. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, but it's not a massive deal, right? So if you have that subheading, don't worry. Up to you to change it or not to change it. Okay, so have a look at your document now. I'm going to give you a minute just to sort of have a look. And when you're looking at now, I don't know how far through all of you are in your discussion chapters. Maybe you don't have any subheadings if you haven't started. If that's the case, draft a few right now. You know, start to think, how am I going to do this via following the lit review structure, the results, something else? So I'll give you a minute to have a look at your subheadings. So looking at a common thread through your table of contents, what I'm meaning there is, you know, those common themes, your aims, your research questions, are those subheadings similar all the way through and showing, you know, those key concepts that your research is looking at. Okay, so while you guys are doing that, let me just look at this question that's just come up in the chat. I'm doing thesis by publications. I have a discussion section in each of my papers. Still in the process. Yes, perfectly fine, of course. How similar, different should my discussion chapter be from the smaller discussion sections? Yeah, look, what I would say is you're basically pulling it all together would be what I would say. So you're almost, when you're pulling them together, they would be similar. They wouldn't be different. So reiterating, restating, and potentially, because remember your research articles are all separate, of course, but they're all part of your whole research design generally, unless you have a number of completely different studies, which some people do, and also our exemplar 1 has done as well. Maybe when you're looking at that, so exemplar 1, don't forget that one is by publication. So if we have a look, and remember they brought the discussion and conclusion together. I think that was what we just saw, didn't we? Yes, the discussion and conclusion is coming together. So realistically for you, you're almost restating and pulling those discussions together, and potentially if they do link in some way, maybe they're informing each other, then you would talk about that, about how they relate to each other, or how they all might inform one research question. Maybe each one informs its own research question, if that's the way you've set it out. So think of, in this case, with your thesis by publication, you're bringing those discussions together and either restating how they answer your questions, your aims. Maybe they link. If they don't link and they're separate studies, that's okay. You just tell the reader, okay, these are separate, but each one might have informed the other. So that's what you would be doing there, is bringing the three, or however many you have, together and explaining how each of them relates to your overall aims, research questions, research problem, and then that would then lead to the contribution. I hope that makes sense. I feel like everybody's is going to be different. So certainly just have a little bit of an idea of how they link. Well, don't have a little bit, have a good idea, and let the reader know about that, because essentially before that, they're almost like three standalone studies, aren't they? And I would say even beforehand, you will have explained how they connect. So you're just continuing that narrative of how they connect that you've already started. Yeah, but I think looking at some other, go to ePrints, QT ePrints, and have a look at another thesis that is doing by publication, and that might help as well. Look at how other people have done it. All right, we're going to keep going.
Sorry, I've got a question.
Oh,
if that's all right.
Sorry. Yes,
Sorry.
yes, you scared me. Oh, yeah, sure, go.
So I've got, mine isn't by publication, but I do have separate standalone chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than having another discussion at the end, is that more like a summary and conclusions section, or does it have to be called a discussion section?
Yeah, no, I think you could have a conclusion. If you've been calling it a discussion in each of those separate chapters, yeah, then you can come to your conclusion. Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be separate. Okay, great.
No, because you've already got your discussion in there, but just make sure at some point you have told the reader how each of those connect, if they do, which I would assume they do. And you will tell them beforehand, and then you'll need to tell them again after. So maybe in the conclusion, you begin it by saying, hey, remember how I had all those discussion sections? Here's a quick recap of them, and then that's going to lead to my conclusions.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cool. All right, how do we get you thinking? Because you've got a lot of thinking to do. There's no doubt about that. So the first thing is actually write everything down that you think. Okay, you will forget. You'll come up with some fab ideas when you're not near your computer. So somehow try to write them down so you remember. Don't think, oh, I will remember. You won't. Too much going on in your head. So write a big list of everything you've learned during the data collection, the analysis. Keep in mind your aims, your research questions. Just keep adding all your thoughts to those things. How are you answering the aims? How are you answering your questions or your hypotheses? You could try making a table maybe that links to your literature review as well, and then adding in your evidence. Whether you put the table into the document, most likely not, but it just helps give you a big picture overview. You can try some mind mapping, because as I keep saying, even though you're going to have these different interpretations related to the questions, the themes, or the data collection and analysis, each phase or stage you've done, they do need to come together at some point, usually, even if it is to say they're informing each other or they're just to answer the different research questions, but they're all part of your one big project, remember, so we need to bring them together. All right, so going backwards and forwards constantly, keep pulling out your themes and ideas that might connect. And when you will have a number of results and findings. Okay, so they're a good starting point to say, okay, here's this result based on the interviews I did. This is what the discussion might look like with some dot points. Then you have another way that you collected and analyzed data. So there's some more dot points that you can start to write as you're thinking and analyzing and pulling it all together. So those messy drafts are going to be where you need to start, and you refine and tidy and restructure later on. Especially, you know, even just from the couple of questions we've had so far, it's very clear that everyone, there's a complication, isn't there? It's not a simple thing to just go from, oh, here's my research design, here's my research results, and here's my discussion. There's so many moving parts that everybody has, which complicates it. And a lot of the issues are around how to present in a clear way, how to structure to lead the reader through. And that's why you need to keep the reader in the loop, keep them on board, and say to them things like, hey, I have 6 main findings. Now, none of them are more important than the other. There's no hierarchy. They all connect in different ways. So initially, I'm going to present and discuss each of the main findings, and then I'm going to bring them all together in a subsequent section and explain how they link. Okay, because you just can't say everything all at once. So just keep them on board, let them know what you're doing, and explain why. And the reason why is because you can't write everything at once. There needs to be a structure and a flow. So let them know what that is so that they can expect it. And they can also know, because as they're reading, they're like, oh yeah, but what about that other finding? That seems to sort of link to this. If you've already said to them that, yes, it does, but I need to talk about them separately, then I'll bring them all together later. So as I say, don't wait. Even if you haven't collected the data yet, you know, you will be anticipating what you think could happen. Write your ideas down, write some dot points. And always we need to begin with that paragraph at the beginning of your discussion chapter. You always need to have that paragraph or more to remind the reader of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and of course, how this discussion is going to be structured. So that's the main points that you would need in those beginning paragraphs. So that's the key here. Don't keep the reader waiting. There, as we said, this is your research destination, this chapter. This is all the sections if you're combining. So this is what the reader's been waiting for. Let's be very, very clear and reiterate and say, hey, remember, these were my aims. This was potentially even restating the research questions if you're answering those. This chapter is going to bring everything together, remind them how the data was collected, and explain the structure as well. We do this in every single chapter, as you already know. All right, we're going to look at some examples of these beginning chapters. And this time, your activity will be to pop into the chat anytime that you are seeing the aim of the study, the aim and function of the chapter, a reminder of the data collection and analysis, and the chapter structure. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. So this one is not in your activity sheet. Okay. It's a study investigating first year international students' literacy experiences. It was mixed methods. Okay, this is chapter 6. So let's have a look. This chapter presents the findings from the phase 2 structured interviews. This phase focused on academic socialization, which was part of the research framework, and examined participants' experiences of their new learning environment. The first section provides a summary of the structured interviews and the document analyses for the case study units. Second section reviews participants' results for their semester 1 courses. This is followed by a cross-case analysis and discussion of the main findings from those structured interviews. The discussion also provides insights into whether the academic expectations reported in the previous chapter were fulfilled. The chapter concludes by responding to research question 2, and the question is restated. So let's see. So the research aim is there. Well, the research topic as such. Aim and function of the chapter is there. There's a reminder of how this particular data was collected. Not about how it was analysed though. And the structures there. So you can see how this one is presenting the data and then discussing the data in a subsequent section. All right, next example of a beginning chapter. This is our example 1 and it is in the activity sheet. So you'll be able to read it there, might make it a bit easier for you. So again, aim of the study, function of the chapter, how the data was collected. Can you see any of those things there in any of these sentences? This chapter discusses the key results from the 3 studies and examines the key findings in consideration of the existing literature. So this is example 1, which was by publication, and they had the 3 studies, those 3 research articles, and each of those research articles was one of the studies, okay? Remember we had a look at the table of contents. Each study was guided by specific aims and research questions, and all contributed to the overall aim to identify the characteristics of infection in chronic leg ulcers and to determine the factors associated with the chronic leg ulcers. So see there how they've said, okay, I did 3 studies. They each had their specific aims and research questions, but they all come together where? To contribute to the overall aim. So you may have something like that. Yeah, it is concise. Yeah, we want to be concise. See, this is our balance continually. We want to be clear and concise, but we also want to be explicit. So sometimes conciseness doesn't help us be explicit. So the way around that is to usually add another sentence. The focus of this work was CLUs, included leg ulcers, blah, blah, blah. The goal of study 1. Okay, so the focus of this work, meaning the whole study, the goal of study 1 was to do something. They were tested in study 2, study 3, phase 1, examined something. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on there in those couple of sentences, just reminding the reader of what they already know, right? All of that information would already have happened, but it's reminding. This is a new chapter and it's really important to keep reminding the reader because they're forgetting. They will forget, and they're not reading every chapter consecutively, and they're not sitting down and reading your entire thesis in one go. All right. This chapter first discusses the contributions. Finally, the theoretical and practical implications are addressed, and then there's recommendations. All right, so let's see here. So you can see there's everything there. Sorry, I've got the wrong color. I haven't got any purple in there, but we do have the structure, don't we? That's clear in there. That's my fault. A lot of information in just 8 sentences, but it's clear we know what to expect. We've been reminded about what's happening. Now, I know for us right now, we haven't read those previous chapters, okay? But we have looked at the table of contents and we do have, you know, a little bit of an idea. All right, this is example 2. So also this one is in your in your activity sheet. Page 2 should be. Okay, so this was a discussion on its own, wasn't it? This was a chapter with the discussion on its own. So this is the very first thing the reader sees underneath that chapter 9 heading. This chapter discusses, interprets, and evaluates the findings of the study with reference to the literature. So very similar to this one, wasn't it? Examines the key findings in consideration of the existing literature. See, so you want a sentence like that. There are 6 parts, and then we've got everything there. The summary concludes. All right. Then, I know this is a bit squashed, but you do have this in your activity sheet. So remember we saw how it was 9.1 and the subheading was introduction. This is what they have for the introduction. And this is the first paragraph. There's actually 4 in this introduction. So what I was just sort of saying before is I don't see any reason why this paragraph couldn't have just come straight after that one. It doesn't necessarily need to have that subheading that says introduction. That's what I was trying to say before. Now, I've taken out the citations because so it fits a bit better. Let's see if this has all the things we want it to have. The study was initiated because of my interest and concern for children with learning difficulties, a concern shared by many teachers in the schools in which I have taught. Interesting. What do you feel about that? Basically, the research areas here, this is the aim, isn't it? Definitely using past tense, yes, because the study has finished. You couldn't say here the study is initiated. That wouldn't make sense. My experience has also confirmed that teachers work hard to meet the needs of all students, but necessarily must implement educational programs that are effective for the majority of students. The factors contributing to students' difficulties are complex and may include blah, blah, blah. Emotional influences can have an extensive impact. These are especially relevant in the early years of schooling. So that would have been the research setting, the younger children. 3 relevant requirements emerge from the literature. Okay, so calling back to what the literature review would have said. The first was a need for reading skills, cognitive support, for self-regulated learning and emotional support. Accordingly, there is a need for an intervention approach that integrates both cognitive and emotional factors as proposed in the research questions in this study. Okay, this is quite different to the one we saw before, isn't it? That beginning paragraph. So we've got a research aim. There's information about what's going to be in the chapter. We've got a bit of the chapter structure. We don't know about the data collection and analysis. Is it in this one? Not really, but potentially, remember what I said, there's another 3 paragraphs after this. In the chat, they could have restated the research questions at the end. Yes, I agree. And I feel like those research questions are probably in the subsequent paragraphs for this section. So what we can see is depending, now I want to just quickly go back to this one. Now, this was exemplar 1. So remember the discussion and conclusion were together, okay? So a little bit of a different structure. And then this one is a discussion on its own, all right? And so remembering with this one as well, that they've already had a lot of results as well. So now they're bringing them all together. This is quite a long chapter, which is why there would be 5 paragraphs introducing the chapter, okay? So there's no exact formula here, but what I'm trying to tell you is keep the reader in the loop and give them all that information that they need to get them on board and ready for your fabulous discussion. All right, we got to get moving. Yeah, so there again, yes, so you can see that's what it looked like. That introduction actually goes for 2 pages there. All right, so have a look at your document right now. Look at those beginning chapters, beginning section, and look whether you've done those restating of the aim of the study, the chapter, data collection, and how the chapter is structured. And if, as I said, if you haven't written this part yet, you could jot a few points, a few notes down into your document. I'll give you a minute. Remember, with these activities, of course, you can keep doing them after the session. All right, so just staying on track, as we said, you know, there is a lot going on. Just keep writing down all of your thoughts, discuss the structure and the content with your supervisors, with your peers, seek feedback, make sure that your value of the research and your contribution are beginning to become very clear, of course, in the discussion. This is where we've been waiting. We want that information. We want to be persuaded. We want to clearly see your arguments. Keep reflecting and don't speculate. Remember what we said, the examiners need it to be everything you say, that to be underpinned very clearly by your evidence. And don't go off topic or add new information that you haven't already discussed in previous chapters. If you've got new findings that you weren't expecting, you will have had to already go back to your lit review and add some information around that so that there's nothing new in your results or your discussion or conclusion. All right, let's have a look at some key strategies, which is critical discussion and synthesis, and then we'll get into our exemplars. That's what we're going to look at. Okay, so as we said, you need that original and significant contribution. Don't be overwhelmed by this. A small finding is still potentially going to be significant. It's significant to who? Make sure you articulate that. It's significant to your stakeholders, isn't it? Be brave, trust yourself that you, as we said, you've put in all of the work. This is the finishing touch. Be convincing, be credible, be underpinned by your evidence, and have there been no doubt about your responses to those research questions or hypotheses, okay? And be very clear about what your research is doing to contribute to what we already know in the field. So when we're looking at your contribution, remember we were looking at that quote earlier on, and it was about knowledge claims. Remember what a knowledge claim was? It's about what you found, what your arguments are, what you're claiming your contribution is. Will readers believe you? Yes, because you've already got those fabulous, informative and persuasive chapters before they get to the discussion. You've justified everything. You've explained everything. They know already, yep, there's a research problem. It needs urgent attention. They know that you've got research gaps that you're addressing, and they already know that your research design is appropriate, that it's valid and reliable. So it's measuring what you want to measure, and it's consistent so that another researcher could also implement the same study. Okay, so basically, being able to persuade and convince of your knowledge claims and your research contribution is all set up before you even get here to the discussion. So big reminder, you've got that narrative, you've got that story, you've got those common threads of the aims, problems, research questions all the way through until you get to this final highlight of the interpretation of the research results. So what do you think your potential contributions are going to be? Or maybe you already know for sure. Maybe you have already written your discussion chapter and you're just revising it at the moment. Anybody want to share? So are you contributing a new methodology or a new way of investigating this research area? Are you bringing in a cross-disciplinary approach? Maybe you're going to add to a theory. Maybe there's stakeholders within this research field that are not usually researched. Maybe you're contributing to some debates to help alleviate those debates. Maybe you're improving the way we do something. Yeah, so thank you in the chat. New participants in the study area. Anybody else? Maybe it's none of these. Maybe it's something completely different. Both theories and methodology. Great. All right. So as part of thinking about your contribution, now remember the contribution can't be just the research gaps. That could be one that you've helped gain insight into the research gaps and you've contributed knowledge, but it can't, addressing a research gap can't be the only thing, right? Think about your aims as well. So we looked at this at the start. So in the chat, contribution to understandings that haven't been examined. We need a deeper understanding. Yep, expanding knowledge on emerging theoretical approach, exploring a practical field not been researched in Australia before. Good, good, nice. Okay, so remember this. You jotted down a few of these points before. So checking your document, just make sure that you have evidence from your research that might help to fill the research gap and your evidence related to your research aims. So when you're thinking about your knowledge claims and your contribution, they should be extending from these, okay? And then of course, gaining insight to the research problem as well. So potentially this is a good way to get started if you're a little bit stuck. Think of your research gaps. Have you helped to gain insight into the research gaps? Think of your research aims. How has your evidence that you've collected and analyzed and reported, how does that help to reach your research aims? And of course, how are you helping to address that research problem as well? So they could be good starting points. So I'll give you a minute to write something into your draft. So let's look a little bit more deeply at critical analysis and synthesis. So your analysis is where you're pulling everything apart, all of the pieces of evidence from your research, from the literature, to get a better understanding and insight and to make judgments, okay? You're making judgments about that evidence. Synthesis is basically putting it all back together, comparing the pieces of evidence, and then putting them together to make a clear and valuable argument about what your research is telling us. What is it contributing? So the pieces of evidence are empirical evidence from your study, the previous studies in the literature that you've already analysed, remember, in the lit review, and then being very explicit and clear about then where does your research exactly fit into the current knowledge in the research field. So you've extended, you've given more insight, you've helped answer some questions, you've given insight into the problem. So critical analysis is where we want the reader to get a deep understanding of your study. So you need those really clear sentences. This means, this suggests, this shows, okay? And a way to start when you're examining your evidence and you're wanting to make those judgments, what have you learnt from your research? You know, you've been learning this whole time. Really be thinking about each bit of evidence and say, okay, what is this doing? What has this contributed to my understanding, so that then you can give the reader a deep understanding? Then once you've got that, then are they confirming, contradicting, challenging, advancing current knowledge? Are the insights new, unexpected? Are you solving a controversy? Are you revealing new gaps? Sometimes that happens with research. It's actually opened more questions Are you making new connections between fields of study? It could be 100 different things. So you examine, you interpret, and you make judgments. The critical analysis are those judgments. What's your position? That's your argument. And your judgments are your argument. So you're persuading. Then we're beginning to allude to some actions. So in the discussion, you're saying, okay, here's my interpretation. Here's my judgments. This means we need to do something, right? And then that's going to begin the thread for you in your conclusion about the recommendations that you're going to give. So let's look at an example. This is presenting the results. This is actually from our results writing circle. The last section of the survey asked you Likert scale questions related to expectations of teachers. We've got the figure there. Underneath, we're explaining what the highlights are here. And then there's an interpretation, a beginning of an interpretation. Okay, so a reminder of how the data was collected. The data is presented, important points, planting seeds for the discussion, right? This is from a results chapter. All right, so bearing all of that in mind, I want you to now look at this one. So the second part is coming from the discussion section. So can you see that thread? Can you see how it's planting the seeds in the results section? Many participants expected to receive support from teachers. So in the discussion section that links to this piece of evidence, when academic staff provided encouragement, it enhanced the participants' learning and increased their confidence. Okay, empirical evidence coming from interviews. Then we've got evidence from the literature review or the literature. As Wingate explains, teachers are the experts, so they can provide that invaluable support. All right. Showing interest and kindness and offering assistance are simple teaching strategies, but they can have a significant influence on new learners' feelings of belonging. So there's some themes there that had come up previously in the results section. Evidence from the literature, more. There's a reference there. I've taken that out just to make it a bit shorter. Therefore, it's essential that academic staff understand the critical role their classroom practices play to promote learning, the development of effective academic literacy skills, and just as importantly, a positive transition into university. So remember where we are. This is the discussion section. So we still need to get to the conclusion, which is the recommendations and implications. So this is the thread that's starting to say what. What do you think that last sentence is going to lead towards? It's essential that academic staff understand the critical role their classroom practices play. So what is your guess as to where are we going? Where do you think the conclusion is going to go? The implications and the recommendations? Anyone want to guess? Probably something about the staff and teachers and making sure they get professional development and make sure their classroom practices are doing the things that the learners need. Yeah, so we're continually planting the seeds, and then we're going to get to those specific implications and contributions and recommendations. All right, so that's a little bit of critical analysis. So the synthesis, remember, is we're bringing it all together. Okay, so in fact, the analysis and the synthesis, they overlap. We're bringing it all back together. Okay, now the synthesis is more than just pulling the previous literature. It's also your research and bringing it all into a unified whole, which is an explicit contribution to your field. So you're moving backwards and forwards. What do your findings do to add new insight? All right. So they overlap. Here's this section again from the discussion. So we've got critical analysis, making judgments, and synthesis is bringing in the literature. So that last sentence is saying, based on previous research and the current research, this is what we can say, is that it's the teachers who play the critical role. The participants were students, remember? Okay, but students and teachers go together. So it's saying for the students to get what they need, we need the teachers to give them what they need, okay? So we need to find that balance. You need paragraphs and sections that have your voice and your judgments, plus the synthesizing of bringing in the literature. Don't let it just be the literature. You need to have those explicit judgments. And you also need to, of course, answer the research questions and make the contribution clear. So if you can have those beautiful paragraphs with the critical analysis and synthesis, then that will bring you to that clear contribution and answer to the research questions. So I want you to have a little look through some of your paragraphs to make sure you've got that balance. And what I will give you a tip is that I would guess that you're going to have the synthesis in there, but not enough critical analysis. Okay, I do not ever want to see in a discussion chapter, or I shouldn't see a paragraph that is just citations. Okay, you must have your voice in there. Now, whether that's you're making judgments on the literature or also bringing your evidence in as well, I would hope you would have both, but maybe you'll need some paragraphs that is sort of bringing back the literature, and then you might bring in your evidence after that or even beforehand. But certainly you should be having those paragraphs that have both in there. The synthesis, bringing in the literature and where and how your research connects, and of course your voice and your judgments in there as well. I'll give you a minute and then we need to get on to our exemplars. Okay, I know I haven't given you much time, but keep checking, and I just got a couple of more slides here and then we'll get to our exemplars. So we talked quickly about tense earlier. Realistically, in your discussion chapter, it should all be simple past or simple present, never in the same sentence. The participants reported something. This suggests something else. When you're telling us what happened in your research, the experiment showed something, past tense, you've already done the research, okay? So that needs to be in past tense. When you're talking about your interpretation, you're in present tense. If you want to compare the research literature as a whole, you're going to use present perfect. Why? Because the research has happened in the past, but we know there's going to be more research in the future. So that example is, although previous researchers have found blah and blah, this study provides new insights, suggests contrary evidence, blah, 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 okay? Because you can mix in one sentence present perfect with present simple. Some phrases to get you started if you're a bit stuck. And also noting there, avoid words like interestingly, remarkably, those sorts of adjectives. Use academic words: significantly, importantly, crucially, critical. And check out the Manchester phrase bank as well. That will give you some really great starting sentences. If I would say most of you have gone in here to the Manchester phrase bank, but if you haven't, please take a minute. It's really, really useful. All right, we are up to our exemplar. So what I would like you to do right now is pop into the chat. Do you want exemplar 1 or exemplar 2? So takeaways from today, really write down everything you're thinking of so you don't forget. You know, as we said, there's a lot of things going on. Keep those aims, the problem, the questions clear in your mind, because everything's always got to come back to those, and lead the reader through. Remember that, again, lots of things going on, okay? So keep them in the loop, let them know, look, this is what I'm going to do. There's a lot happening. I'm going to explain each of the findings and the contributions, and then I can bring them all together if that's what you're doing, and keep planting those seeds to continue that thread. You've gone from there being a problem to your methodology, to your results, to your discussion, and then your implications and conclusions and recommendations. You can use the QR code if you want to fill out that anonymous survey for me. I do look at your feedback. Remember, 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree. I've also put a link in. And so if you'd like to fill that in, that would be fabulous. Now we've got, I know actually a few of you, actually almost all of you, come to the peer feedback sessions. Isn't that ironic that you're also here today? Maybe not ironic, maybe just great. Oh, hang on. Thanks, Michael, for letting everybody know that they're fantastic. I agree. Oh, I think they are as well. I actually don't have a link to register, but look, we've got 3 more left. 18th of November, 23rd, and the 8th of December. Yeah, you do. Look, it's such a great way to collaborate and critically discuss with your peers. It's not scary, but you know what? I'm convincing people who are listening to the recording, not you guys that are here, because I know that you come regularly and that's fantastic, but certainly a really good way to improve your writing and improve your drafts as well. Don't forget, the resources are up on Blackboard already, or the PowerPoints. I'll let you know when the recording's there. Thanks, Legion. Yeah, I think you've missed out on the last few ones because they've been on a Thursday. So I think the next few are not on a Thursday, so you might be able to come along. Careers Q&A tomorrow, Writers Wellbeing Lounge Thursday, and next Monday, Competitive Roles Outside Academia. Good one, a really good one to attend. And of course, you get your HDR Matters, you've got HiQ and Blackboard. All right, anyone got a question before we finish up? We've still got 5 more minutes or so. Happy for you to turn on your mic, or if you want to talk in the chat. But basically, yeah, thanks for coming along. I hope. Yep. Who's Michael?
Sorry?
Did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah, I did unmute. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I've got 2 final sessions for the year. I've forgotten what they are because I'm one's on Tuesday the 15th at 10 a.m. and one's on Wednesday the 16th at 10 a.m. I'm not sure if you're running them or I've forgotten.
Tasha. Yeah, so
Tasha. How can I forget? Anyway, sorry.
That's
but that's
okay.
all right. I mean, I've got them written down in the diary.
Yeah,
but
so yeah,
sorry?
15th, the 15th, that's Tash presenting conference and milestone seminars. And what was the other one?
I think it's another writing one, or maybe something like that the next day, but that's okay. I've got them on the other computer. I just don't have them
Right,
here.
yeah.
But I mean, what I got out of today, I mean, I did fill out the survey and it was good, but just a quick comment that I wanted to make, and I thank you very much for the breakout room, because we had a really interesting discussion, which has helped me with a particular issue that I've got at the moment, and particularly also to the writing. But one of the things that I found interesting is the conciseness of the opening sentences of a discussion, because I was sort of but I was used to, okay, you do introduce what the paragraph's going to be about, and that's a habit which I've gotten into. Never used to do that, but certainly do now. But that it doesn't have to be some epic 20 to 40 word sentence saying, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. That breaking up of, you had one sentence, I think it was more on the qual one about leg ulcers. I get a bit yucky because I had one once, but it's gone. Won't go there. But they are curable though. But anyway, that aside, it was really good. A bit in the qual one as well, that, you just make a brief sentence saying this will discuss X, and then the next sentence, your aim and purpose, and then go forward. See, I never used to sort of write like that, but I do now. But anyway, that's really good reinforcement for me. So thank you for that.
That's okay. Yeah, look, and that's exactly what I'm saying. By the time you get to the discussion, already there's so many things going on. So yeah, try to simplify it for your own thoughts, and then thinking of the reader. Always think about the reader, leading them through, and we want them on board. And at that beginning of the chapter, they're a bit excited. They're like, oh, what's going to happen? And it's all very clear and they can see where you're going to go, they're on board, they're feeling good. And that's what we want, isn't it? We want the reader feeling good and on board with what you're doing. Yeah. Oh, well, that's great.
And that was one of this is the very last thing, because I know, but when you don't have to have a PhD, but sometimes they ask graduates to mark honours theses. And I actually did I've been a reviewer, journal reviewer and editor, but I marked my first ever thesis about a week ago. And it was only, like I said, I'm not saying it's only honours, because the student did a really excellent job, but some of the things, I'd say they probably go on to a PhD. But the point was that ever since I've done that, and I've gone back and, both yourself and Tasha, Tasha's writing, things that I've done over the past year and a half, it's now starting to click into place. So hopefully that will reflect when I get my data. But it was really interesting that through reading someone's thesis and honest thesis and going, wow, you're doing the things already that I've only just learned in the past year. So that was a real eye opener. I wouldn't recommend, it is a lot of work doing a thesis. So I can imagine what the PhD and master's ones are like. But yeah, so once again, thank you. And thank you for providing the slides and things. That's really helpful. And thank you everybody for coming today. It was fantastic.
Thanks, Michael. That's really good. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's great.
Carrie, I want to check something as well. In the discussion, or like in the results finding session, I basically categorized it by research questions. And the discussion I went, because you have to include the theoretical framework, and then I went according to that. Is that fine or should it be according to research questions?
No, the theoretical framework sounds good too. Yeah. And you probably have structured your lit review along those lines as well, potentially. So, exactly as Michael said, it's about being concise and leading the reader through. And so it sounds to me you've put thought into this. Okay, so now, see what the feedback says. You might need to tweak here and there, but even if the feedback comes back to say, okay, we need to restructure a little, then it sounds like you've got a backup idea as well. And it's not a matter of rewriting, it's just revising, I suppose. But yeah, I know that everybody's putting a lot of thought into this, so one trick, I guess, is just write a note somewhere to say why you ended up with this structure, because you had reasons. And then what might happen later on when you're reading it back after you have a little break from this chapter, you might go, why did I do it like this? So we could sort of maybe remind yourself as to why you did have reasons and you had thought about it deeply. So yeah, sounds good.
Hey, thank you. And one more thing you mentioned before was that you always have to incorporate literature in the discussion, but if you have like a novel finding, you won't find any literature for that.
That's true. Yep. So then you say, this is new, no one's done it. Yeah. Great. That sounds good. Well done.
Thanks so much, Carrie.
That's okay. All right. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody in the recording. Thank you for listening. See you next time.